go. I think that's, we're hot. Here we go. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you again. And this morning, this year, I've chosen a topic that's a little more investment-centric than sometimes I speak on. Sometimes I talk about a general balance sheet type topic. As important as the investment portfolios have become, and with the time allotted, which is only about 30 minutes, I thought I could do a pretty decent job of explaining to the audience what it is that delineates a high-performance investment portfolio from one that doesn't do so well. And you're going to be very, very surprised to learn that there isn't a big leap of risk that the high yielders have. So hopefully, at the end of the session, you can have something to take back to your office and perhaps employ at your own bank that you're not in the high quartile in terms of investment performance. Now, to sort of explain the undertone of what I'm trying to get to today, and knowing that Missouri is a great baseball state, I thought I'd draw a baseball analogy to this, and that's especially timely because here we are on September 9th. Is this September 9th today? Not only the St. Louis Cardinals leading their division, but the Kansas City Royals are leading their division. Boy, it's been a long time. So, lots of enthusiasm going on for baseball here in Missouri. Now, I was hoping someone could tell me the name of the individual who holds the career record in Major League Baseball for most home runs. Who knows that answer? Somebody's got to know who holds the career record for most home runs. Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds, exactly. I've got a $5 bill in my hand for the person who can tell me who holds the Major League record for most career doubles. Nope, not standing. That's close. That's good guess. Red Shades? No, not Red Shades. How about Tris Speaker? Has anybody heard of Tris Speaker? He played 100 years ago for the Boston Pilgrims, and he owns the Major League record for most career doubles. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is that when you're building an investment portfolio, you're not supposed to be trying to hit home runs. You're supposed to be trying to hit doubles, right? The risk in the balance sheet is supposed to be high on the loan side, and you're supposed to be making solid, maybe conservative decisions about that group of investments that you call your investment portfolio. So I'm going to go through this session talking about getting doubles, because I think that's really what you're trying to do. And by the way, Chris Speaker is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Barry Bonds is not. Okay, so you can do quite well by getting doubles in your investment portfolio. Now, we're going to go through a couple of sessions. This is really a three-part session, so we're going to go through them by 10 minutes each at a time. Why do we care? What makes a high-performance portfolio, and what are the risks that are embedded in a high-performance portfolio? Here's why we care. It's simply that your investment portfolio constitutes a bigger percentage of your balance sheet than it has in a long, long time, maybe ever. This slide in front of you here shows that deposit growth has greatly outstripped loan demand over the last 6 or 7 years. And even though your deposits are down a little bit, I think you all experience a little bit of deposit runoff if you're a typical bank. You're still not hurting for funds. Okay, there's not a lack of liquidity on your balance sheet. So there's plenty of money to invest in your investment portfolio. You can see from this slide, and if we look at the dark red bars on this, those are true investments on your bank's balance sheet. This is FDIC colorful data, by the way. The light blue is excess reserves in the banking system. That, by and large, is what's financing the Fed's $4.3 trillion balance sheet, just excess funds running around in the banking system. But if you even just look at the dark red, because core investments are higher than they've been ever. Here's a graph, pretty simple, pretty stark. It shows what the percentage of your balance of your assets, percentage of assets on your balance sheet are in your investment portfolio. You can see they've gone from about 22% back in 2007, 34% today. There's somewhere around $14 trillion in the U.S. banking system. $1 trillion of those 14 have migrated from loans to bonds. That's a bunch of zeros that has gone into the investment portfolio. And then finally, of course, we know this one story too. Our net interest margins continue to get compromised. So it's quite important that your investment portfolio throw off some amount of performance for your bottom line. Now, this is a preliminary step into the rest of the presentation, but this actually is something that's going to give credibility to the numbers that you're going to see for the rest of the presentation. This again is FDIC information. We took the asset group, the banks that fall in the asset group, of 300 million to $1 billion, because that is about the average size of the customer that we deal with. I know there's banks in this room that are larger than that, there's banks in this room that are smaller than that. We took those banks that are between 300 million and $1 billion, and we cut them into 4 slices. We sliced them up based on the yield in their investment portfolio. And you can see that the top quartile of this group, those 284 banks that are in the top quartile, were yielding 353. That's a tax equivalent yield. This is as of June 30th. The bottom quartile is yielding about 160. That's a 200 basis point difference almost. That's a bunch. And notice, interestingly, that whether we're looking at the top or the bottom quartile, they both have about 30%, 28, 29% of their total assets in investments. I would have thought that the top yielders would have a far higher percentage of their assets in bonds in the bottom quartile, but that's not so. The bottom quartile looks to me that they've got some dead assets out there. And look how it's affecting the ROA. If we go all the way to the far right, that is a big impact on the return on assets. It has everything to do with the top quartile working the balance, working their investment portfolio a little better. Now, we don't know much about these banks' portfolios just from call report data. They give us very sketchy information. For example, we don't know what sort of ARMs they own. We don't know what the makeup is of their municipals. We don't know what sort of CMOs they own. They're just lumped in general categories. So we're going to leave this data, and we're going to go into our own bond accounting customer data, because we do know everything there is to know about our bond accounting customers. We do bond accounting for about 600 banks in the country. Some of you in this room pay us a fee every month to give you a list of reports that shows you what you own. And since we know everything there is to know about these 600 banks, we can drill down a little bit. I know the print is fine here, but don't worry. I'll tell you what the data says if you can't see it in the back of the room. These are our bond accounting clients cut up into 4 quartiles based on yield, all right? And here's where we begin our story. The difference in the top quartile and the bottom quartile for our customers is 190 basis points. Now remember the FDIC data, the difference is 193 basis points. So that tells us that our customers' makeup looks a lot like nationally how banks are constituted. So we're going to try to piece together what makes a 190 basis point difference in yield, which is a bunch of money that's being left on the table for those who aren't paying enough attention to their investment portfolio. The red line here shows the trend for the top quartile yields for our customers. We've been doing this for about 500 to 600 banks for quite some time now. And the bottom line, the blue line, is the bottom quartile. What's important to notice about this is that when interest rates rise, the bottom quartile catches up to the top quartile. When interest rates fall, which is what's been happening for 7 years now, the gap widens out. And the reason is pretty logical. It's because the lowest quartile bunch has more liquidity, more short-term investments, and they're more quickly able to invest than ever, regardless of what rates do. If rates go up, they're able to invest more, they're able to catch up. If rates go down, guess what? They're able to reinvest. So the gap widens out, and that 200 basis point gap has really been in place for about 5 years. One day, if rates go back up, I expect that gap to narrow, and it won't be 200 basis points difference, it'll be closer to 100 basis points. Okay, why 190 basis points more? Well, first is, I'm going to call it selection. I've just put a box around a group of investments that are the simplest, shortest, and lowest yielding. These are treasuries, bullet agencies, and callable agencies. And what you'll see is that for the top quartile, that adds up to about 8% of the total investment portfolio. Bottom quartile, you add these three together, that comes up to about 35%. So a greater percentage of the investments are in the lower yielding sectors. That's a choice. That's clearly choice. Where is it made up? It is made up in the municipal sector. Right down here, that comes up to about 38% of total investments are in munis. Over here, the bottom quartile is about 10%. Now, I have to be clear in saying that we understand there can be some good reasons why you don't have a lot of municipal investments. The most logical is that you're not making any money. And if you don't have any taxable income, you have no need to avoid income tax. The tax accountant will be the first person to tell you that. A lot of banks in the U.S. have had they've deferred income in future periods, okay? Not intentionally, but they've done so. It could also be something like you're an S corp. If you're distributing your earnings to your shareholders, you don't have any need to make that money as tax-free. Your tax accountant will be glad to tell you that too. So there could be some good reasons why you can't have a big percentage of munis. So most banks can add more munis into their portfolio if they full advantage of that. So part of it is selection. What else is it? Well, part of it is you might have more investments in a sector that are just destined to not perform well. I've just highlighted callable agencies. And on callable agencies, top quartile 6%, bottom quartile is 18%. 3 times as much of the lowest quartile portfolio is in callable agencies. Now, why am I picking on callable agencies? Simply because they don't perform very well in a rising rate environment. I've highlighted agency callables, and what this tells us is that if interest rates rise, their duration will extend quite dramatically. On our group of customers, their durations will go from about 4 years to about 6.5 years. That would make it the single longest sector in your portfolio in exactly when you don't want an investment to extend. Something else I'll point out to you, and this is the gain or loss, this is unrealized gain or loss in that particular sector. That right now is the biggest loss, unrealized loss of any investment sector. So callable agencies have a time and a place, but be aware that you're probably not going to perform very well as interest rates go up. So I would recommend being very judicious about buying callable agencies. Here's a simple graph to explain what a callable agency is. You buy a bond from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or the Home Loan Bank. It's got a stated maturity that you're okay with, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 years, whatever. And you sell the right to own that bond to Fannie, Freddie, or the Home Loan Bank when you buy that bond. You sell a call option, and they will exercise that option, meaning they'll give you your money back early when it's to their advantage to do that. And when it's to their advantage to do that is when rates fall. They're in the same position that we are in as homeowners and mortgage holders. We will refinance our debt if rates go down, right? So will the agencies. And they will call this bond in when the call date gets here, if it so suits them. A way to avoid this trap is to either buy a bond that can't be called, and you're going to be sacrificing yield today to do that, or you buy one that's got a lockout. And a 5-year bond that's got 2 years of lockout, in our view, is a pretty good structure for that. So we don't mind you buying a callable if you buy some lockout. Your broker can explain the whys and wherefores and the goods and bads of that. You can actually buy callables that has some logical structure to them. Why else is there 190 basis point difference? Well, I'm going to, for the moment, suggest that there is no credit risk in the municipal portfolio, but I'm going to come back to that in a minute. What I'm going to tell you is that the higher yielding quartiles have more dollars invested in non-guaranteed bonds, non-guaranteed by a government. These are going to be private labels. These are going to be issued by corporations. These are going to be guaranteed by somebody other than the government. Okay? And there's a little bit more of this in the top quartile than the bottom quartile. If we add these together, that comes up to about 17%. Over here, that's about 8%. So that's not a big part of either portfolios, but it's just for us to recognize that there is a little bit of incremental credit risk. Not a a little bit of incremental credit risk that exists in the high-performance portfolio. And this is not a recommendation to go buy a bunch of private label mortgage-backed securities issued in 2001. That's not what I'm telling you. I'm just acknowledging that there's a little bit more credit risk in the top quartile portfolios. So now let's talk about the risks. Well, here we see a simple graph that compares the yield on the 2-year treasury to portfolio yield. Red line is the yield on the 2-year treasury. You can see it fell off the table in 2008 and it stayed well below 50 basis points over percent. Here is the yield on our average customer, and it is also trending lower. So as market rates are low, so do trend a bank's investment portfolio. I think that's pretty logical to understand. The longer the portfolio, meaning the less cash you have, the less liquidity you have to invest, the straighter that line is going to be. And remember I mentioned that if rates go up, bottom quartile catches up. If rates go down, it's widening out. Well, the less cash you have, the flatter that line will be. So your portfolio yields are going to generally trend with what market rates do. The risk here is that rates down, lots of liquidity, portfolio. Rates up, no liquidity, you don't get to play in the game of getting your yields much higher. This is something that many of you maybe have not drilled down or at least seen this distilled the way this is. The red line is the net, the unrealized gain or loss. This is a paper gain or loss on the taxable side of your portfolio. And right there is break even. Right? The blue line is the unrealized gain or loss on the municipals. Now you will notice that they do not run lockstep with one another. You would think that a group of fixed income investments would go up in value and would go down in value at the same time. Munis have something going on that taxables do not. And munis have something that's called event risk. Okay? Let's go back for a moment to December of 2010. Look how the value of your municipals plummeted, even though taxable barely moved during that time. Who remembers a news-making event for bankers in December of 2010? The name if you don't count. It was not Orange County. Meredith Whitney. The name Meredith Whitney. Meredith Whitney is a stock analyst who was interviewed on 60 Minutes one Sunday evening. And she, for some reason, decided to talk about the bond market, even though she's a stock analyst. And she predicted hundreds of billions of dollars of municipal defaults to happen in the very near future. Well, starting the next day, everybody started dumping their munis. And it was led by, not institutions, it was led by the retail sector. Retail, another way to say that, is mom and pop. Mom and pop or Meredith Whitney talking about something she doesn't know a lot about, and they started dumping munis, okay? Now, the type of munis mom and pop own are totally different than the type of munis that banks own. But nonetheless, the entire municipal market just cratered. And banks were coming to us saying, is this really all my munis are worth? And we were going, hang with us, for the time being it is. And sure enough, she was wrong. Capitally, she was wrong. There weren't hundreds of billions of dollars of municipal defaults. I think in 2011, there were 14 billion. And that sounds like a huge number, but historically, that's a very small annual loss in the municipal sector. And by the way, the type of munis that banks buy are almost completely insulated from all that noise, because you buy this subsector called a bank qualified muni. A bank qualified muni is very small in size. It can be no larger than $10 million in a given year per issue. You guys are fighting over about 7% of the total muni market because you're buying bank qualified issues. The reason you buy BQ is that you get tax advantage for your cost of funds. And that's a very simple explanation, but that's the fact. BQs perform very well. They are issued for essential services. They're issued for municipal school districts, for utilities, for sewer districts. You cannot build a golf course or a parking lot with a bank qualified issue. Because they're for essential services and because they're almost all general obligations, very few of them are revenue bonds, the performance of them has been very good. The default history has been minuscule. Okay? So there should be very little reaction of the bank qualified market to the general market. But it happened in 2008. And what happened right along in here? Right along in here, just a year ago. Detroit declared bankruptcy a year ago. Detroit's got nothing to do with the bank qualified market, but nonetheless, the muni market crashed in sympathy with Detroit. Now, look, over time, things are going to get right again, and municipals have gotten a tailwind again. They have appreciated quite handsomely, and we contend that there's still more room for the muni sector to continue to perform well. So once again, if your tax kind of tells you that you've got room for tax-free municipals, tax-free investments, we recommend you take a look at that. So that's one of the risks. One of the risks we have in the portfolio is this thing called event risk. That you can't control what goes on 60 minutes, right? Okay? Now, here's the real risk. This is real risk right here. This is the duration criteria. Duration, to put it in oversimplified terms, is when you're getting your money back. If you say that your portfolio's got a 4-year duration, that means that on average it's going to take 4 years to get all of your principal and all of your interest back. Obviously, it's over time you get your money back. You'll get some money back next month. You'll get some money back in 15 years. But on average, if you've got a 4-year duration, you're getting your money back in about 4 years. The longer the duration, the greater the risk, because you've got a greater percentage of, you've got a greater risk that your portfolio will lose value than those with a shorter duration. Notice the difference in duration between the top quartile and the bottom quartile. Top quartile today is a 3.5-year duration. Bottom quartile is a 3.0-year duration. That is not a big difference, folks, for all of that yield. That is a very little difference. That is a minuscule difference. So what I'm happy to tell you is that the top quartile is not dependent on buying a bunch of long bonds. It's dependent on selectively buying a little bit longer. It is dependent on the selection, meaning having more in municipals, more in mortgages, less in bullets, less in treasuries, less in homes, and maybe a little bit more credit risk. That's how we come up with that plus 190 basis points. That's not very difficult, folks. They are not buying sophisticated, complicated, complex securities. They're buying the same securities you are, they're buying them a little bit longer, and they're buying them in a different sector range. Less bullets, less treasuries, a little bit more mortgages, certainly more municipals, and they're buying them a little bit longer. Over here, we extrapolate what that difference in duration means on a plus 300 basis point shock. You know, the irregulars want you to know what happened up 300. Even want you to know what up 400 to 500, they don't. Up 300, top quartile loses 12%. That doesn't scare me any. Bottom quartile loses 10%. That's just not that big of a difference. It's quite amazing how stable the top quartile is. And if you're not sure how much price risk you have in your portfolio, we would love to quantify that for you. Any full service broker has this service they'd be glad to provide for you, and we would also. If you don't know how much your portfolio would lose in a plus 300 basis point scenario, let us do this for you. All we need is a copy of your investment portfolio. We'll update it as often as you need us to, and the regulators will be glad that you know what's going on in your investment portfolio. So in the short time I've had, I'm ready to conclude here. I think we've learned that portfolios, just based on their sheer size, the sheer dollars invested in them, they're more important than they've ever been, at least in this generation, perhaps. It is selection that has the single biggest influence on performance. It is not duration, it's not credit risk. We have also seen that your duration can be affected by we talk about the call risk. That's another way to call risk is optionality. Limit your optionality. That's a great way for you to not have too much to invest in lower rate environments. And then finally, very little credit risk. These are not the portfolio managers in the top 25%. They are not venture seekers. They are selectively layering in a little bit more risk here and there, and over time will pay a big dividend for you in terms of your ROA. Work just went all the way to your bottom line. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are my comments today. As always, I would be pleased to have this sent to you, this slide deck sent to you. If you want to send me an email, call me, or even just give me your business card today, I'd be glad to have that sent. Now, I've got time for about one or two questions, and then you can get our days started. Any questions? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
This is the podium. This is where I'm actually looking at the podium. You guys have a lot of friendly faces, however, the judges I normally see that are giving me a very hard time. As I said, my program's on alternatives to bankruptcy. And if we get that covered on one day, in my write-up, what this was about, I said we've all been there. We've had a customer, you've had a customer, I've had a customer client come in, they're behind their payments, they're defaulting under non-financial covenants, and they threaten bankruptcy. And normally I say, that's where I want to have you. But there are alternatives, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. There are alternatives that actually could benefit you, and I think will help you in cost, and help you with speed, and help you in the result. We're going to cover assignments for benefit of the creditors, composition agreements, and on receiverships. I'm not going to tell you the ABCs of receivership. I'm going to talk about something that's happening even this week that's going to completely change the law of receivership in the state of Missouri. All right, so that customer comes in. Normally what you have are option-wise are Chapter 11, Title 11, a 7, a state court supervised assignment for benefit of creditors. Missouri has a statute, Chapter 426, and it says they appoint 3 qualified persons to sit and liquidate the person's estate, but they have to run to the state court judge and they get approval for it. It's just like bankruptcy, and that's one of the problems we have in bankruptcy that I think you've all dealt with, and that's time delay. Receiverships will deal with, as I told you in an announcement. Common law assignments for benefit of creditors, that's what I'm going to talk about, in composition agreements, and we'll cover some war stories as we go along. Okay, why have we always thought we should liquidate bankruptcy contents? Some of these, you guys are going to say, well, this helps the debtor. I'm going to tell you some of these help you too. The automatic stay stops your competitors from trying to foreclose on the assets. It stops your competitors also from trying to collect from that debtor. So not only does it help the debtor, it does help you as a lender. Preferences. You're saying, I'm going to go out and get all those preferences that he paid to his inside officers and directors. You as a bank may have gotten a preference. You're going to find in a few minutes, this is a big change in the common law assignment for benefit of the creditors. Fraudulent conveyance, complex legal issues, can operate a business in a Chapter 11 and hopefully preserve value. Discharge of the debt, you're saying, well, that helps the debtor. It could help you too if he's discharging every debt but your debt as part of a plan or a reaffirmation. And size of asset pool and size of creditors normally dictated filing bankruptcy. That's a typo. It belongs down here. And that's what, it is costly. Bankruptcy is costly. Our dear friends in New York have ruined it for all the bankruptcy lawyers in the country, charging hundreds of millions of dollars for these big cases in New York. And it's really made people step back, do forbearances, do workouts. And I understand it. It's a costly process. Administrative procedures in bankruptcy are time consuming. If you want to do something on day 20, you got to have a motion before the court so that the judge can approve it. It takes time. You could be dealing in a Chapter 7 with a trustee you don't even know, a lawyer off a panel that hasn't ever run a business, not good. Your customer may not like bankruptcy because he can't direct that the trust fund portion of his taxes get paid. Normally, you guys are aware that if he's not paying you, normally he's also using the trust fund portion of his tax, of the tax money. So, why do a sale liquidation outside of bankruptcy? An assignment for benefit of the creditors is the functional equivalent of Chapter 7. You're going to see that momentarily. MIBA has made bankruptcy more expensive. That's the Bankruptcy Abuse and Consumer Protection Act of 2005. Alternative procedures are less expensive. We'll talk about that. Speed. In a common law ABC, you go from noticing up to a sale in 20 business days versus doing a 363 sale and having to have bankruptcy judges approve it. Not only the sale when it's over, but the bidding procedures before you do the sale. The debtor, and it should be the lender with help, the debtor select the assignee or the receiver, and the assignee of the ABCs. There are several guys around the country that most lawyers that are in my profession know, and they're professionals at it, and they're very good. And you get a more prompt distribution of creditors when you do it outside of bankruptcy. I'm going to skip down to the assignment for benefit of creditors. The objective of an ABC is to liquidate and distribute all the assets of the debtor. Now, let me give you a war story. I have one of these that just wound up in Massachusetts. What we did was we liquidated the hard equipment, assets, receivables here. The real estate was in separate affiliated LLCs. Those assets were not conveyed to the ABC assignee, and they liquidated the real estate in an arm's length transaction through real estate agents and got arm's length value while they liquidated and distributed the rest of the assets, the receivables and the liquidation of the machinery and equipment out separately. Never had to go to a judge. Never had to go to a judge. And actually, in that case, I wasn't representing the lender, I was representing the guarantors, and the guarantors had fully had their obligation fulfilled, meaning the bank got paid off too. The assignment is a voluntary, it's just a definition, is a voluntary transfer by the debtor of his or her property to another person as an assignee for the purpose of liquidating the debtor's assets and distributing pro rata all the creditors the net proceeds. Here's something. You don't have to be insolvent to do this process. You can have a solvent debtor as well. Statutory assignment, we don't do that in Missouri because the procedure is so cumbersome. Missouri was recognized in case law many years ago. Common law assignments are good, and so that's what we do. Common law assignments allow for the speedier, more flexible procedure. Why? Because I'm appointing, the debtor's appointing, the lender is helping to appoint a person that is taking these assets. The advantages of an ABC, you can talk your debtor into doing this because you say, debtor, by the way, you convey these assets in this ABC, you're not going to have the stigma of being a bankruptcy. It's a motivation factor. The liquidation can be accomplished with greater flexibility and without formalities and supervision of the bankruptcy court. Biggest advantage of all. Assignees of ABCs do not normally have bankruptcy avoidance actions except fraud-related actions. Here's a cash for lender. Every state has a different authority for what an assignee gets. In Missouri, an assignee doesn't have preference powers. He has fraudulent conveyance powers, but not preference powers. If you as a bank have gotten a large preference in the 90 days before bankruptcy or the date of the assignment, wouldn't you rather have an assignment for benefit of creditors where your payments that you got within that 90 days is not exposed to a bankruptcy trustee coming back and asking for the preference? By the way, in my law school class I teach at UKC, I get to the preference section in bankruptcy, and I say, okay, this that situation, you get offered a preference. What do you tell your client? And they just, oh my God, it's just terrible. I said, you take it. Because most preferences, however, settle at 60, 70, 80 cents on the dollar, maybe less than that. But there's no exposure for in an ABC in Missouri. Delaware, however, statute, if you have a Delaware ABC, they do have preference powers. They all have fraudulent conveyance powers. Unperfected security interest. In the UCC, an assignee of benefit, an assignment for benefit of creditors is defined as a lien creditor. He has the same rights as a bankruptcy trustee. He has the same rights as a receiver. He's gonna step in at a priority level above anybody else, unperfected or perhaps perfected late. So, same rights, same powers. The taxes, you can define what the payments are, they have clear priority over wage claims. And here's your motivation factor to tell your borrower to do it. He potentially is gonna have a bigger return and get off that guarantee. Disadvantages, your borrower's gonna say, I don't get a discharge. Your answer to that is, with your company, you don't get a discharge either in Chapter 7 or liquidating 11. The bankruptcy code doesn't provide for it. A transfer to an assignment for benefit of creditors for 120 days, in and of itself could serve as a reason why someone can be put into an involuntary bankruptcy. But no automatic stay. You know what, in reality, there is an automatic stay, because every time I've been there and been involved in one, when the assignee sends out letters that says, I'm collecting all these assets, I'm gonna pay you out a proportionate distribution, the collection activity ceases. And I've been 4 of these in the last 5 years, and every single time just ceases. Because you get the hands out of the guy that can't manage his assets into someone that's trying to liquidate the assets. Unless agreed upon, can't use secured lenders to fund the cost. I'm telling you, if this works out, you do your calculations, there's a reason for you guys to potentially fund this for speed and ultimately maybe a higher return. How do you do it? I won't go through all these. You have a trust agreement, pretty thick document. You transfer the assets to the assignee in trust. Property has to be paid for the benefit of all the creditors. You can't compromise your discharge claims or the like as a condition to participate. And so it's just a trust agreement, and once he has title, the assignee is the one that actually has equitable ownership of all the assets. This is the assignee, the way it stays all intact. This is why you need a professional assignee. Regular communication with creditors is the key. MIBA effect, I talked about this, has made bankruptcy more expensive than before. And this non-bankruptcy solution is gaining popularity and something we should do. And it is gaining nationwide a higher acceptance by certain lenders because of the speed and the lower cost. Fees, they're going to charge these are the assignees, charge 5 to 10% of the liquidation proceeds. And let's go to composition agreements. Composition agreement, best way to start out here is to tell you a war story. About 10 years ago, I was representing a manufacturer. I owed about $30 million. Probably 18 of it was to the secured lender, who was a New York-based asset lender. And he owed $12 million in trade debt. Trade debt was killing him. So we went back to New York, and by the way, we were summoned to New York on Monday, Martin Luther King's holiday. I said, that is not a good sign that they'd come in on Monday to visit with us. But we came to an agreement that day. We came to an agreement to do a composition. And that composition was to offer 10 cents on the dollar to the trade creditors, which would come out of the actual operating monies that they had. We got 95% acceptance of the trade creditors, thus lowering the amount of his debt almost $9 million overnight. What we do, and we'll go through what the little parts are, how this comes together. But after he made his deal under the composition agreement, he paid down, he had the money to pay down his debt. The asset-based lender in New York got out 100 cents on the dollar because they freed up some dollars from operating costs to deal with the trade debt under a composition agreement. How do you do it? A composition agreement is an agreement between a debtor or 2 or more of its creditors. It actually becomes the contract. When I, on behalf of that manufacturer, offered 10 cents on the dollar to all of his trade creditors, and they took it, 95% took it, it was a new contract between the manufacturer and those creditors that they, if he defaults, they can sue on the contract. Now, some of them insist about clawback provisions, as you would expect, but that's just part of negotiation about how much you're gonna let the debt claw back. Our lender didn't want any of it claw back, and we were successful to be able to get it done that way. Why did the trade debt do that? They saw a first lender with $18 million that was in default and was ready to foreclose. That's why they made the 10 cents on the dollar deal. They would have gotten nothing. That's the line you play. A typical composition scenario, the debtor makes a written proposal to the unsecured creditors, requesting that they accept what is due them, either in immediate or future payments or a combination. The proposal includes a detailed disclosure of the debtor's financial condition. This is a key part of it. You have to do detailed financials, and then you actually have what would be the equivalent of a first meeting of creditors, normally at the attorney's office that's putting the composition together, and they can come in and they can ask questions to their heart's content. If any of you have ever been to a 341 meeting, how much does the U.S. trustee let you ask? About 45 seconds. And then you have to run off and do a 2002 exam. Really, it's better. 2004 exam, excuse me. A composition agreement may use a trustee to collect the payments. That's just a contractual provision. This is actually taken, I won't read it, this is when Congress passed the bankruptcy law in '79, this is how they compare bankruptcy to the old composition agreements. By the way, composition agreements grew out of the garment district in New York. That's where they were making these deals time and time again. Why they said they wanted bankruptcy law was better was because in the composition agreement, not you couldn't necessarily bind everybody. Well, I'm finding out you don't need to bind everybody if the financials end up okay after you get 95% of the people to do what you asked them to do, or 50%. Practical issues deciding on whether to attempt to proceed with the composition agreement might be the mere size of the unsecured creditor universe. I'll give you an example. My partner Larry Fraser and I filed the farmland case, 10 years ago, 11 years ago. We had over 100,000 creditors. We couldn't do a composition agreement with 100,000 creditors. The mere size of the universe. I had about 200 to deal with at that manufacturer. It's a whole different story. A company involved in a composition agreement doesn't benefit from the automatic stay, but I find the practical impact is exactly the same as in the ABCs that I just discussed. There's no requirement that all the creditors participate unless it's in the composition itself. I find that to be a foolish provision to be in, because as I said, you can normally get the greatest percentage of the trade net to go along with this. The consideration is part payment of the sum due and the promise to pay, and on the other side, the consideration from the lender or the trade debt is the forbearance or promise not to sue. And so that it's fully supported by consideration. What I'm saying here, once the composition is entered into, it's binding, and all creditors who agree and consent cannot be withdrawn without the consent of the other parties. Once agreed to, the composition and it's made in good faith, free of fraud, is a valid contract. And once the debtor is fully performed, in my case, the 10 cents on the dollar, the debtor can't be sued for the original debt. And normally it'll provide for a discharge. I'm having to hurry through because of my limited 25 minutes here. Important slide here. While there is no requirement that all creditors participate in a composition, those that are due are expected to share and share alike, with no creditor receiving more unless there's a full disclosure to all participants. This is talking about back deals like, hey, ABC, trade, if you take this 10 cents, I'll give you another 20 cents on the back end. It doesn't work that way. That would be a fraud. It would upset the entire composition agreement. So the deal is, as the deal is presented in the composition agreement. That's why I just said a preference paid after completion of the composition is fraudulent if it is done pursuant to a secret agreement in effect at the time of the composition, but not fraudulent if the agreement is reached after the debtor is fully performed. If you want to go out to ABC Trade and say, hey, thanks for doing this, it's over now, I'm gonna give you 10 more cents on the dollar because you were so cooperative, that's okay. Briefly, receiverships. Missouri is an unusual state. It's getting to be an unusual state. Missouri's receivership statute is 155 words out of 515-240. I bet you everybody in this room has had their lawyer file a receivership for them. The problem you run into in receiverships, where you only have a 155-word statute, is you're left to the mercy of the judge to decide what he wants to do. Normally, you as a lender will put together this 15-page order that has every power in the world and hope that the judge will agree to it. Then you have to hope that the judge agrees with you throughout the process that the way you're implementing that particular order is the correct way, and it's being interpreted by you as the judge would interpret it. So, hey, receiverships are great. They allow you, and you have several options after default to gain control. One of them is to get a receivership. By the way, I should point out both federal and Missouri State's courts allow you to appoint a receiver. We've had a lot of luck in receiverships at the federal level. We've not had so much luck on receiverships, not in getting the receiver, but in the implementation of the receivership. So starting with Ohio, and then Wisconsin, and then Washington, and Minnesota, those states have adopted over the last 5 or 6 years receivership statutes that are very explicit on what you can do. They allow the receiver to go in. It tells you what the powers are that the receiver has. It tells you who he has to notice. It tells you how he can liquidate. It tells you each and every provision that a receiver will need to know. So, 2 years ago, the Missouri Bar appointed a subcommittee of the Commercial Law Committee, 12 lawyers in the state, and I was lucky enough to be one of them, to write a new receivership statute. And we have written that new receivership statute. It's 36 pages. You guys are saying only lawyers can write 36 pages of a receivership statute, but it's very needed for the reasons I've just stated. That receivership statute has passed out of the Commercial Law Committee, and it's going to be taken up by the Board of Governors here this week at the Missouri Bar meeting in Kansas City. If it passes there, they already have legislative support to introduce that bill to the legislature, and it should be. I think it's well conceived. Of course, I'm probably prejudiced, but I think it will pass close to the form that it's in. And so as we sit here today, a year from now, we may have a receivership statute that looks a lot like, I use this word advisedly, like a bankruptcy. Why? Because the problems we're going to have is the federal preemption. You know, bankruptcy is mentioned in the Constitution. In fact, this past week I was in New York. I'm the head of our restructuring group for Brian Kane, and I had to go to all these offices, and I had to meet with the lawyer that's not having the best of years. And their answer to me was, well, next year it's all going to be all right because, you know, bankruptcy is in the Constitution. And I said, okay. But it is. And so that's called federal preemption. And there was a famous case in the Ninth Circuit, it was called Sherwood Partners versus Lycos, that said the California statute was unconstitutional because it invaded the federal preemption rights found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that says Congress shall pass a uniform law of bankruptcy. That particular statute that case has been attacked and questioned many, many times. But what it did say in that particular statute was that the two indicia of bankruptcy are equitable distribution and a discharge. Those are the two things to look for. We don't have a discharge in this receivership statute. We do have an automatic stay, which is what is the basis of equitable distribution and stop everybody. But we've limited the automatic stay in this new receivership statute to 20 days. The reason why is to give the receiver some breathing space, but perhaps get away from this federal preemption problem that could be a problem. I won't deny it. this. I was on a panel at the American Bankruptcy Institute a year and a half ago with a lawyer from Minnesota on single asset bankruptcy. I was moderator of the panel. Remember I told you Minnesota has a statute. He said, don't ask me about single asset bankruptcy in Minnesota because we don't have them anymore. We use our receivership statute to liquidate the assets. And so I think there's a possibility that that's going to be something you guys could use in the future to be able to liquidate your assets more quicker, not more quicker, but quicker, and with less expense than what you're dealing with in bankruptcy cases. So I hope that that's something that you all can use. Now, if you like a copy of the statute, I'm happy to send you one after. I'd like it to pass the Board of Governors first, which will be this week, but I'll have a final draft. My email address is mgstigling@briancave.com, and I'll email you one after next week, and you can take a look at it. Be more prepared than your guy across the street, because since they weren't here, they don't know that there's a new receivership statute that's going to get passed. Perhaps. So, I hope that helps. Bob, I'm right on the number. So, I'll thank you for your attention again, and I'll turn this over to my good friend Bob.